Welcome to another edition of Head On Shaw TV. I'm your host, Ian Holmes. It was Wednesday, June 26th, and Nanaimo Public Schools trustees made a massive decision moving towards the 10-year facilities plan. Consolidation, a big part of this plan, as the overall plan is to close down 8 schools and rebuild 4 others. 4 schools have been voted for closure so far, including the junior and senior learning alternative programs. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the impact that these massive changes will have on education, the public education system locally in School District 68. And to help break that down is Mike Ball, the president of the Nanaimo District Teachers Association. Mike, thanks a lot for coming on the program.
No, you're welcome.
It's a controversial plan in the sense that a lot of facilities are closing down, Mike, over the next 10 years, and that's the way it's going. Some parents and students have their concerns. Teachers, what concerns or maybe positives? How do you see this plan taking shape, your overall assessments on the facilities plan, Mike?
I think teachers have a mixed reaction to the plan. Those who were directly affected by the schools that were closing had a very short notice that their schools might be closing and had to go through that process. Some teachers probably think that the schools should have been closed a long time ago with a very small enrollment. Those that work in those communities and live in those communities are affected. Their day-to-day lives are now affected by closing those schools. So a pretty mixed reaction. Teachers came to us and asked us about why an outside consultant was brought in when senior management should have been doing the process in their view. So they wondered why you would bring in somebody from the outside who doesn't know the communities, who doesn't understand the interactions with those communities as to why they would do it. So I think that was some of the biggest questions we had.
Right, we saw the footage off the top of the program. It was South Wellington parents and students, and there's that concern. It really hits home when you close the neighborhood school. Hey, Mike.
It does, and teachers are part of those communities. Some of them have been teaching in those schools for 15 or 20 years. So they're really a big part of that community. So yeah, it does hit home, and the thought of with this plan potentially having to move your child 2 or 3 times through the plan because of consecutive closings of different schools certainly has some angst for many parents.
Now this plan, the process is quite interesting. It's been several months of putting this together with the consultant's report. It comes out in late April, and then it's kind of laid on everybody that, hey, a number of these schools could be shut down for the start of the school year. It seemed to kind of come in quite quickly at the end of this school year. Do you think the consultation process was rushed, essentially just a 60-day public consultation process?
That's what's mandated by the ministry. So they followed ministry guidelines. So they did what they had to do. I think the timing was difficult, problematic. We got to a point where staff on the 26th of June found out where they might or might not be teaching next September, which was a very poor choice to do it at that time. I would have hoped that this plan would have been started in an October, November, and a lot longer consultation process would have helped to ease into knowing by May where you'd be teaching the following September. Closing it on the 26th was very, very problematic.
And it just seemed that the district put themselves in a difficult position, kind of unwinding for mistakes made earlier. It was back in 2007, I believe, the big decision with Woodlands Secondary School and NDSS not to have the super high school at Woodlands and close down NDSS. And now here we are about 6 years later, and it's kind of being thrusted through quite quickly, it seems. Now, these next 2 questions on consolidation, really interested to hear your thoughts on this. First off, the negatives of closing down these schools. Where do you see the big problems lie in that regard, Mike?
I think the impact on the communities. Trustee Saunders brought up the point of extracurricular activities. Right. So if I close Cedar Secondary and I move the students to Busby, the impact on them is, can they take part of extracurricular activities when buses leave right after the end of the school day? Well, those parents who can afford to drive their children are able to have their children take part, but those that can't are going to be impacted, and those students won't be able to take part. I think the other negatives are for the teachers who are just part of that community. They really have grown up with those communities, and now they're having to move to another school. So.
And the Cedar community, South Harewood, the Harewood area, John Barsby, those are two separate communities. Yeah. And Board Chair Jamie Brennan brought that up. He has some concerns about that. These are two different areas, geographically quite a distance apart, and you're essentially absorbing the Cedar students into John Barsby. That could maybe cause some challenges too.
I guess the question I would ask the board is, why was Cedar Secondary built in the first place? You know, it was put in there to serve the community, to move South Wellington students to Chase River and North Cedar Intermediate and Woodbank, and potentially moving North Oyster students if they decide to close that school into the same. And then eventually moving the high school into Barsby and moving all of those elementaries into one building, which is what the initial plan called for, is again problematic, and it creates a huge high school, which part of their planning was to have high schools no bigger than 400. Well, they're going to start with a school that's probably over 500. So that doesn't seem to fit their other guidelines.
With these drawbacks with the school closures, are you receiving ongoing correspondence from teachers? What's kind of the buzz around the NDTA office in regards to that aspect of the plan?
I think there was some resignation that the closures were just going to happen, that this time it was going to just get pushed through. I think the feedback that was given from teachers, from the communities, helped them make maybe some better decisions at the 26th board meeting than the original plan by Dr. Player. For example, the Woodlands, changing the plan for Woodlands and not having it closing in 2 phases. That was the feedback they got. So they did listen to the communities. But teachers found out on the 26th, they're on their last 2 days of school and they're gone for their summer break. So really, we're not going to know the most feedback probably until September, until they come back into the schools again.
In talking with District Superintendent Dave Hutchinson, he really hammered home the point to me in an interview following that recent decision about, this is going to mean so much in terms of programming, enhanced programs in consolidated facilities, freeing up more money as opposed to running these half-empty schools in some cases to really hone in and have improved programming. From a teacher's perspective, Mike, I'm sure that there's an element of that really must excite you in terms of the programs that can be delivered down the road.
Yeah, I look at the International Baccalaureate program that they're proposing to put into Randerson Ridge and then eventually into Dover Bay, and the advanced placement programs they're talking about placing into a couple of the high schools, including John Barsby. Yeah, these are good programs. It takes a lot of time and money to bring in an IB program. It's not going to be done overnight. I wonder why they chose those particular schools to put those programs in. My feeling is, and I think we heard this from the board chair, was to counter students being taken out of the public system and moved to private schools, because they were able to offer IB programs in some of the private schools, which for me brings about the bigger question of why we're having to do the facilities plan in the first place, and that's basically 10 years of underfunding from the Liberal government. We've got a system now where we have the highest funding ever. Well, we know that it costs way more to deliver goods now than it did 10 years ago. Our students are receiving $1,000 less in funding than the Canadian average. We are 10th in the country in funding for education. We're 12th when we include all of the territories. That is abysmal. Is that the root of why we're having to do a facilities plan, because of the underfunding?
Right. And of course, 4 more years of the Liberal government back in office, and they're heading towards looking for a 10-year contract. As you roll your eyes at that suggestion, we'll see how that plays out. That's a different topic for another day. So essentially 10 years down the road with the key elements of this plan in place, there's still some more decisions to be made beyond 3 years from now. Those decisions will come in due time, but the template is laid out for a massively more condensed district coming up here. So from your perspective, what does the district look like 10 years from now, and in the fashion that that programs are delivered? Do you think ultimately it will be a better program in a decade from now as opposed to what we have right now, Mike?
I think Dave Hutchinson said they were looking for improved facilities. And I think in 10 years we will have improved facilities. I think there's no doubt in that. But that's going to require funding from the province. You're not going to be able to do a rebuild at NDSS without funding from the province. So you're not going to be able to move the students from Woodlands into NDSS unless that funding does come out. Will the schools be better built? Will they have better facilities for learning? I would think so. I think that's the aim of this plan, and I think that will happen. Will we be delivering better programs? Teachers always work on improving programs, whether the facilities are run down or not. So I think there are many questions about that. Will we have one big elementary in Cedar? I don't know. Does the 10-year plan, is it as fixed as it appeared at the beginning? Or are we going to see some more reviews coming down the road with them making adaptations? I suggest they probably will be, and I think we already saw that when they saw that the first 2 or 3 years weren't as doable as Dr. Player laid it out, or as he would have suggested it came out.
Well, the district offering a sober second look at North Oyster and Davis Road, for example. So there is, with that consultation period being extended until December, those were two schools that were tabbed for closure. And to your point about leveraging the provincial money, I think the fact that District 68 showing that they're serious about shutting down these older schools, I think that gives them a pretty good case to get that money for this mega high school at NDSS. I think it better positions the district than maybe it did a few years ago with keeping a lot of these schools open.
I believe that is the case. I am concerned about the Ladysmith community. I think the choice to go ahead with putting grade 7s in with the high school so that they can keep the high school open and offer the programs that they said they could offer if they moved the 6s and 7s there. Changing to only 7s certainly is an improvement. But I guess the question would be, if you were moving 7s to the high school in Ladysmith, why wouldn't you be doing it in all of the secondary schools if it was an educational decision? If it's purely a budget decision, then I have an issue with that. And I think the Davis Road parents were quite vocal in attempting to keep their school open for another year, which they managed to do as part of the first process.
And in closing, Mike, is this the process teachers will continue to keep a close eye on and offer feedback to district officials as the plan forms moving ahead?
We talk all the time. They're in discussions with us all the time. I mean, they consult with us on the process, and we offer feedback, whether they want it or not sometimes, but we certainly offer our feedback.
Excellent. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's interesting to hear your take on this plan. As it evolves, it's changing. It's going to take a few different forms, I think, over the next few years, but really appreciate your insight and coming on the program.
You're welcome. Thank you. Big
changes in School District 68. Really appreciate Mike Ball. He is the president of the Nanaimo District Teachers Association, as a new era of education, public education, is settling in here on mid-Vancouver Island, with a number of school closures already made, more coming, and likely 4 school rebuilds coming up here down the road as well. Mike Ball, my guest from the Nanaimo District Teachers Association. I'm Ian Holmes. Thanks so much for joining me for another edition of Head On, delving into the issues that matter here on mid-Vancouver Island. See you next time.